Okay, that's my typical circle. That's more like it. Okay, so what I do to get a better circle, because I want to show you how to get there, like I said, without tracing. And so what we do is I'm going to kind of practice this motion. It's like a circular motion with my hand, with the pencil. Okay, that motion, that's the arc or the angle I want. And I notice some parts of my circle are either stick out too much, like that little part did, or don't stick out enough. And so if it doesn't stick out enough, if I practice that little arc with my pencil and I'm like, there's a discrepancy, I'll fix it. And I just rotate my paper as I work, and you'll notice that I rotate my paper a lot as I work, especially as I'm drawing this sphere. Ooh, there's quite a nub that sticks out there. Let's see if I can fix that. Yeah, because typically when I start drawing a sphere, I cannot draw a very good circle. So it takes me this little process to get a good circle. And it's nice to know how to get there. So yeah, just kind of this arc with my pencil. And then I just erase all the oopses. And there's lots of oopses in my drawings. So many. I have learned to fix oopses really well. Why? Because I make so many of them. I make a lot of mistakes in my art, but as an art teacher, it's my job to fix oopses, and I've learned to get really good at it. So this is the way I fix a potato circle. All right, try to get all that eraser mess out of here. It's nice to get that all out of here before I start any shading. Because if you're trying to shade and you have a little nub of eraser, a little piece of eraser, it's gonna really screw it up. Okay, so now that I've got that circle, pretty circular, I'm gonna go ahead and draw kind of a moon shape here in my circle. So this little moon shape is important. And when you draw this moon shape, little tips of the moon, it's important that they curve around. They come to a sickle here around the circle. Okay, so I've got my moon shape. And really, I drew those lines too dark, because once I start shading, I'm actually not going to erase those lines. They're just going to disappear with my shading. But if they're really dark to start with, it's difficult to get them to disappear. Once again, get all those erasers bits out of there. And then I'm going to start my shading finally. Okay, so there's a really nice technique for getting smooth shading. I want to hold the pencil near the back. And I'm going to move my pencil back and forth. I'm just using a regular number 2 cheap pencil, the cheapest kind I could find at the store. Box for about $1. And I'm going to move my pencil back and forth and slowly pull my pencil away. And as I pull my pencil away, I let up on pressure, and it hits the edge of that little moon shape. And as soon as I hit that edge, I'm going to consciously fade to white. Okay? And I'm going to rotate my paper and do the same thing. So pushing darker at first, letting up on pressure, and I hit the moon shape and fade to white. Okay, rotate my paper. As I rotate my paper, the distance is quite a bit shorter here. So I'm going to move this pencil back and forth, get a dark shade, slowly pull the pencil away. I'm going to shade this whole thing without any smudging. I try to encourage my students to learn how to draw without smudging, or to shade without smudging. It's an important skill, I think. Makes for a really clean looking shading. Okay, so as I get around this sickle shape, it's a really quick blend from dark to light. Okay, yes, I realize this is quite rough at this point, and I'm okay with that. Rotate my paper back, start here, the same pull from dark to light. And the edges of this, each section of shading overlaps the other edge of the previous pull. And pull from dark to light once again, hit the edge of the moon and fade to white. Okay, pull dark to light, fade to white. Okay, so at this point it is pretty rough. It almost looks like a pill bug or a potato bug, whatever you call them. And then I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to overlap them very consciously right over the dark overlap right there, right over the top of that. I'm going to do this again. So fade or push dark, pull, and as I pull, I fade to white. Just keep doing this again and again. It's important that as you hit the edge of that moon shape, don't just stop your shading. If you just stop your shading right there, you're gonna see a very obvious line at the edge of your shading, and it's going to end up looking pretty dorky. Okay, so just pull this shading, hit the edge of the moon, and fade to white. I'm going to push this clear around as if I had a little bit more sickle, more of the end of the moon right there. I really want to make that shadow look as though it curves around that sphere. Overlap. And same motion. Just get smoother and smoother. Okay, so this is a start. I'm going to come back and smooth this out even more here in a minute. But for now, I want to get a cast shadow on there. Your cast shadow should be opposite your highlight. So this is my highlight. Just drop some eraser bits there. But I want my cast shadow opposite that. So the cast shadow is sitting here on the table. And I imagine this ball is like sitting on a table. Anyway. So this cast shadow is an ellipse shape. An ellipse is a circle. So if I have something that's circular like this piece of roll of tape, I could use that to outline it, but I didn't. Anyway, if I have this roll of tape and I see it directly down, it's a circle, okay? But if I view that circle from a different angle, like this, now that is an ellipse. So an ellipse is a circle viewed from a different angle, okay? And so the shadow of a sphere is actually a circle. But we're going to never see that shadow as a circle unless you're looking somehow through the sphere from the direction of the light source. It's just, you're not Superman, so you can't do it. Sorry. Okay, so I've got my cast shadow here. just the shape of it. My cast shadow, I'm going to go ahead and fill in, but instead of holding my pencil near the back like I did before for the smooth shading, I'm going to hold the pencil closer to the tip because I need to press this shadow hard. So I'm going to press this pretty dark. The cast shadow should be the darkest area in your drawing, assuming you have only one light source on your sphere. And especially right next to the sphere. So if you're drawing any object, any cast shadow is going to be, so cast shadow is a shadow cast by the object, obviously, but any cast shadow you're drawing is going to be sharper and darker closer to the object. So as it gets further away from the object, it's actually going to lighten up a little bit, and the edges will become a little less crisp. Okay. Make sure the shadow is nice and dark, and I can shade from a couple different directions here, really smooth out that shadow. Okay, right here next to the sphere, it's going to be pretty dark. Okay. Really being rough with my shading right now. That's because I'm going to go over it several times and really smooth that out. And one technique for getting smooth shading is to shade from multiple directions, almost like cross-hatching, but in a shading way. Okay. So I mentioned the shadows lighten up the further they get away from the object. So my shadow is going to do that here. As it gets further away from the object over here, I'm just going to rotate this so it's a better angle. Rather than try to move my wrist at some nearly impossible angle to shade this, it's just way easier to rotate the paper. So I highly suggest doing that yourself. Okay, so that shadow lightens up a little bit, and I'm going to try to smooth that out just a little bit more, really darken that shadow, especially right next to that ball. Yeah. But right at the edge of this shadow, I'm going to give it almost a little bit of a blur here. Smoothly shade the edge there, because shadows, the further they get away from the object, they get a little bit of a fuzzy edge. They're not very crisp around the edge. Okay. All right, there's my cast shadow, my sphere, and a lot of people would stop right here, but not me. What I'm going to do, the next step is I'm going to add a reflection back up in the ball. So assuming this ball is sitting on like a light table, or a light colored table, light shaded table, it would have a little bit of reflection off that table, and that is going to be the difference between this sphere looking real cool and less cool. Okay, so the shape of that shadow is kind of a chubby ellipse here. Okay, so that's an ellipse. It's a all right, and I just lightly draw the shape of that reflection. And I'm not going to, a lot of people will try to erase that reflection into their sphere. Don't do that. What we're going to do is we're going to make that reflection show up by adding more shading around. object. And I'm going to shade from another direction. That technique I told you about before, how that can help smooth your shading. So I originally shaded by pulling this way. Now I'm going to shade from another direction and just add shadow around that reflection. And see the edge there's a little, oh no. Gave myself some eraser mess. There we go. This step probably takes the longest. You have to be pretty patient to make this step look good. So I'm just increasing my shading, my value in the sphere itself. So more shading in the sphere, just pushing that darker. And as I push it darker, I kind of avoid this reflection spot. I do go over the edge a little bit. I want that line to disappear that I drew there. And the way to do that is to add shading around it. So I'm gonna really push that shading right around that edge, trying to match that darkness out here. You'll notice sometimes I do some pretty rough shading within my sphere, and like you'll see a few lines show up. I'm not too worried about that because I have so many directions of shading that usually resolves itself into pretty smooth shading. Okay. You can see that starting to turn into a reflection. It almost looks like a light spot, and most of the time you would have guessed that somebody would have gotten that by erasing an already darkened sphere, but quite the opposite. We just add more darkness around that reflection. That reflection used to be the darkest area in the sphere, and so you can see how much more shadow we've added to this sphere. I think I'll make another video showing you how to turn this sphere into like a basketball, maybe. It's pretty easy, just adding a few lines, but I'll show you how. I like to draw a basketball so it looks like it's in motion. I'll show you how to do that as well, because just a stationary ball is less interesting. Just adding shadow. If at any point the sphere gets darker than my cast shadow, I probably need to come back to my cast shadow and add just a little bit more darkness. It should be always just a shade or two darker than the darkest area of my sphere. And I might come around the edge of my sphere and just really clean up that edge. Kind of left it really light right there. Just getting the cast shadow in there. A little bit of lightness right on the edge, almost a little glow. It's kind of cool looking, so sometimes I'll leave a little bit, but not much. As I'm working, I'm really trying to keep my hand off of the sphere. If my palm rests on the sphere, it's going to smudge that sphere a lot because there's just a lot of graphite sitting there ready to be moved around. If I'm adding that darkness to the edge there, the outline, I need to push my darkness right there on the tail of that moon shape. So I really need to improve or darken my shading here so that it matches that a little bit better. Okay. All right, well, that's how it's done. That's how I do it anyway. There's lots of different ways to draw any shape, I'm sure. I'm sure there's a million other different techniques for drawing a sphere, but I find this works pretty well, and my students are usually able to mimic this really well, so give it a try. You're welcome to pause the video throughout. You'll need to, I'm sure, just to get caught up on certain parts of the shading. Maybe get the brush up here. I have a brush that brushes this eraser garbage right off. But not right now. There you have it. A sphere. All right, give it a try. I'd like to know how it goes for you.